The biblical text from the book of Exodus is a true historical document. And this text contains clear clues concerning the route of Exodus, which has led us to this location at the Red Sea.
There is a battlefield at the bottom of the Red Sea. We're not talking about a single shipwreck. We're talking about an entire Egyptian army.
At this point, my heart is bump, 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 beating down there alone in the dark. I really knew.
A recent high-tech dive has just uncovered what amateur explorers have claimed for years.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Now that's something interesting.
Hundreds of chariot wheels, horse skeletons, and human remains, perfectly preserved in coral.
I hear you on target 4. It's a massive gamma reading. It's one of our primary targets. We've been down there a couple times now. I don't know why we can't find what's down there, but it's eluded us thus far.
This finding doesn't just support an ancient story, it threatens to rewrite it. And get this, Egyptologists are entirely silent. The implications of this find are staggering, and the story behind it is even crazier.
If there were chariots found in the Red Sea, it would probably have something to do with the crossing of the sea.
The chariots in deep. In the late 1970s, along the shores of the Gulf of Aqaba in Egypt, Ron Wyatt claimed he had solved one of the Bible's greatest mysteries and found the exact location of the Exodus crossing.
I believe that I was the only one that volunteered at the time when God was ready to reveal all these things.
He argued that while surveying the Sinai coastline, he identified the actual point where Moses and the Israelites entered the sea. To him, the traditional northern proposals were incorrect, and the real crossing occurred at Nuweiba Beach, a vast coastal plain pressed between steep rising mountains and the edge of the Gulf. Wyatt believed the size of the beach, its isolation, and the way it fit into the surrounding geography matched the description of a large population halted with no clear route of escape except through the sea. Wyatt's explanation relied on several interconnected observations. He asserted that beneath the waters off Nuweiba, a submerged ridge formed what he described as a natural underwater land bridge, sloping gently from the Egyptian side to the Saudi Arabian coast. He viewed this feature as a continuous corridor, wide enough for a mass migration on foot, and claimed this unique underwater shape did not appear elsewhere along the Aqaba coastline. In addition to the topography, Wyatt described diving in the area and encountering coral structures that seemed to take on geometric outlines. He interpreted these as preserved forms of Egyptian chariot wheels, axles, and hubs, arguing that coral had grown over ancient military equipment and had retained their shapes even though the original materials had long since decayed. He further connected these observations with the geography around Nuweiba, noting that the steep mountains rising directly behind the beach resembled the conditions described in the biblical narrative, in which the Israelites were hemmed in with no path of retreat. Wyatt also maintained that across the Gulf, on the Saudi side, he identified features he believed were consistent with the Israelite journey, including boundary stones and altar remains, which he argued supported his broader reconstruction of the Exodus route. These claims sparked curiosity because the region itself presents several unusual features. Nuweiba Beach is one of the few expansive and remarkably flat coastal plains along the Gulf of Aqaba. Its scale invites speculation about its potential to accommodate a large encampment. The surrounding mountains rise abruptly, creating natural funnels, dead ends, and narrow passages that can easily restrict movement. Beneath the water, bathymetric maps reveal a ridge-like structure running between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, leading some observers to consider whether this formation aligns with an ancient narrative that the Israelites camped there. Even coral formations contributed to the interest, as coral can occasionally grow in shapes that appear geometric or wheel-like. For many people encountering Wyatt's material for the first time, the combination of beach size, underwater contours, and coral shapes made the location seem worthy of further examination, mainly because it diverged so dramatically from traditional scholarly views. However, when specialists carried out their detailed investigations, they discovered significant problems. Marine geologists studying the Gulf's bathymetry found that the so-called land bridge does not have the gentle slope Wyatt described. Instead, it descends sharply into deep water on both the Egyptian and Saudi sides, with gradients that would be impassable for large numbers of people or animals. Biologists examining the coral photographs explained that coral naturally forms radial and circular shapes and can create structures that coincidentally resemble wheels or hubs, even in the absence of any artifact beneath. No datable material, metal cores, or identifiable man-made objects were recovered to support the interpretation that the coral had grown over chariot remains. Archaeologists noted that there were no campsites, tools, food remains, or settlement layers around Nueva that could be connected to a population movement of the scale described in the Exodus story. Claims regarding altars or markers on the Saudi side were later reassessed, with surveys showing that the features belonged to unrelated periods or were natural formations. But something was extraordinary about Wyatt's claims. To find the wheels, Wyatt said he had dived into the river, which is at a depth of 200 feet. Except he had done that using scuba equipment suitable for only half that depth. Despite the interest generated by the topography and the unusual coral formations, no independent archaeological or geological study has verified Wyatt's conclusions. As a result, the location remains unconfirmed and is generally regarded as unsupported by the disciplines that have examined it. But Wyatt's ambition wasn't confined to the seafloor. He soon turned his attention to the heart of Jerusalem, claiming a divine encounter in a subterranean chamber that would lead him to what he called the greatest archaeological find in human history.
The reason I dug in that particular place was an unusual. I was walking along and my left hand just went out like that, and my mouth said, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant's in there."
The Hidden Ark. On January 6, 1982, Ron Wyatt publicly announced that he had located the Ark of the Covenant within a hidden chamber beneath Jerusalem. He asserted that the sacred chest, believed to contain the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, had been concealed directly below the place where Jesus Christ was crucified. According to him, the discovery came after years of intermittent exploration, repeated visits to the same area, and a sequence of digs that he believed were guided toward a specific underground system. Wyatt stated that the Ark had been hidden during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem 586 years before Christ. He described priests lowering it into a chamber within the city's natural cave network, then sealing the entrance and leaving it inaccessible for centuries. To support this timeline, Wyatt referenced an 81-year-old statement by Ellen G. White, who had written that the stone tablets of the covenant were still concealed, preserved, and awaiting a future revelation. He treated this as confirmation that the Ark had remained untouched since antiquity. His search centered on the Garden Tomb area, where he believed remnants of the Roman crucifixion site still existed. During his work there, he said he identified 3 depressions in the bedrock, which he interpreted as the sockets where Roman crosses once stood. At the central depression, Wyatt reported finding a stone plug fitted into the opening. After removing it, he said he uncovered a vertical crack descending deep into the stone. He associated this break with the earthquake described in the Gospel of Matthew and considered it crucial to what he believed occurred at the moment of the crucifixion. Wyatt reported that further digging led him into an older tunnel system beneath the site. He described crawling through narrow passages partially obstructed by debris, broken stones, and remnants of earlier quarrying. Eventually, he said he entered a chamber filled with rubble that had to be cleared by hand. Within that chamber, he recounted discovering a large stone container with a fractured lid. Through the crack, he saw an object reflecting gold. He concluded that the object inside the container was the Ark of the Covenant, preserved and untouched since it had been placed there before the Babylonian conquest. He went on to describe a dark, dried substance on the ceiling directly above the stone container. He said this material had flowed through the fissure above, hardened, and fallen onto the top of the golden object below. Wyatt identified the substance as the blood of Jesus Christ, which he believed had run down the cross of crucifixion, passed through the stone fissure opened by the earthquake, and landed on what he identified as the mercy seat. He said he collected a sample and submitted it for laboratory analysis.
Same thing we see in living blood. The scientist in Canada says that these things never die. The blood may dry up.
According to his account, the laboratory reported that the cells were still alive and that the sample contained 24 chromosomes, 23 from a human mother and a single Y chromosome without paternal contribution, which he interpreted as confirmation of a virgin birth. Wyatt added several further descriptions of events inside the chamber. He said that angelic beings were present, communicating instructions and preventing the Ark from being removed. He also stated that he encountered Jesus in the chamber, identifying him by a distinctive blue-bordered garment. These statements became part of his later public accounts of the discovery. The site's custodians released a formal response. The Garden Tomb Association in London, which owns and administers the property, rejected the claims completely. They confirmed that Wyatt had received permission to dig under supervision, but emphasized that no biblical artifacts, temple objects, or items resembling the ark had been found during any part of his work at the site. They stated that nothing recovered supported any of his assertions. Archaeologists responsible for evaluating discoveries in Israel also issued direct statements. Joe Zias, former curator of archaeology and anthropology for the Israel Antiquities Authority, explained that Wyatt had never conducted a licensed excavation in Israel or Jerusalem. He added that none of Wyatt's reported discoveries aligned with known archaeological data, and that no evidence from the digs supported the claims in any form. The reported laboratory analysis of the blood sample also lacked documentation. Wyatt provided no written report, no laboratory name with consistent details, no slides, and no physical sample for independent review. Over the years, he gave differing accounts of where the testing supposedly occurred, listing multiple cities in separate interviews. Specialists noted that recovering intact, testable chromosomes from ancient dried material was beyond the capabilities of laboratories in the early 1980s, especially when no chain of custody or scientific record had been presented. Wyatt later attributed the absence of physical evidence to external restrictions. At times, he said the Israeli government wished to avoid political or religious conflict, and therefore discouraged disclosure. At other times, he stated that angels had instructed him not to reveal proof until a future date, but officials from the Israel Antiquities Authority publicly denied any involvement in restricting him. They stated that no prohibition had ever been placed on Wyatt and openly challenged him to present the blood analysis report if it existed. As more details of the account depended on supernatural intervention, the claims could not be examined through archaeological or scientific methods. With no artifacts recovered, no licensed excavation, no verifiable laboratory results, and explicit denials from the site's custodians and archaeological authorities, the announcement of the ark's discovery remained without confirmation. But Wyatt's quest for biblical proof continued to reach back to the very dawn of time, to a mountainside in Turkey where he insisted he could touch the petrified planks of humanity's salvation. A mountain of mystery. The search for Noah's Ark did not originate with Ron Wyatt, but his involvement placed him within one of the oldest quests in recorded history. When he turned his attention toward the mountains of eastern Turkey, he was stepping into a pursuit that had captured imaginations for more than 2 millennia, fueled by scripture, ancient reports, travelers' tales, and the enduring belief that a physical remnant of the biblical flood might still survive somewhere in the highlands of the ancient kingdom of Urartu. The Genesis account describes the ark coming to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, a broad region rather than a single peak, and that ambiguity created a vast canvas for speculation. Generations of writers contributed to this developing tradition. Josephus, drawing from earlier Babylonian accounts, wrote that remnants of the ark could still be found in Armenia and that people collected bitumen from it. Even in the 4th century, St. John Chrysostom referred confidently to the mountains of Armenia as the place where the ark's remains continued to attract travelers. Throughout the Middle Ages, explorers and traders traversing the region added their own stories. Some insisted the ark had long since deteriorated. Others claimed it remained visible on distant peaks. When Wyatt arrived in Turkey in the late 1970s, his attention was drawn to the Darupanar site, a distinctive boat-shaped formation discovered in 1959. The outline measured roughly 160 meters and sat on a remote mountain slope not far from the Iranian border. For Wyatt, the shape alone was arresting. He believed it matched the biblical proportions of the ark once expanded for cubit conversion, and he interpreted the form as the mineralized remains of a wooden structure buried and preserved by flood sediments. On repeated visits, he described finding what he called rib timbers and deck sections embedded in the outline's sides. He said that ground-penetrating scans revealed an internal pattern resembling a series of rooms, which he linked to the compartments mentioned in Genesis. Scattered around nearby hillsides, he identified several large standing stones with carved holes as possible drogue stones, the heavy anchors ancient mariners used to stabilize a vessel in rough seas. The combined effect of the site's shape, scale, and location created a powerful impression. The most striking element of the site was its unmistakable silhouette. From above, the formation resembled a ship, a tapered prow, a broad midsection, and a squared stern. It appeared as though a colossal vessel had come to rest on the mountainside and slowly fused with the ground. The idea that the ark might have petrified over thousands of years seemed plausible to many of Wyatt's supporters, who embraced the concept that mineralization could replace wood grain by grain, leaving behind a stone cast of the original structure. For those already open to the possibility, the form itself felt like confirmation, a solid outline in the correct region that stood out against the vast landscape of eastern Turkey. However, when geologists examined the site, they had other thoughts. Through field studies and sampling, they identified the formation as a natural syncline produced by complex folding and erosion, rather than the remains of a man-made vessel. The material composition consisted of solid rock, volcanic basalt mixed with sedimentary layers, without any trace of organic remains. Researchers explained that the ship-like outline was created when a large slab of rock slid downslope in the distant past, carving out a hull-shaped cavity in softer surrounding clay. Over time, erosion sharpened the profile, producing the distinct bow and stern appearance. Subsurface scans showed parallel geological layers rather than constructed chambers, and the stones presented as anchors were recognized as local stelae or boundary markers from much later historical periods. Core samples reinforced this interpretation, revealing only natural rock strata. Even creationist geologists who supported the concept of a global flood rejected Wyatt's conclusion, stating that the formation lacked every hallmark of a preserved wooden vessel. The entire case ultimately rested on a visual resemblance, an example of the human tendency to see intention in natural shapes. Beyond the Darupanar debate, scholars continue to search for the historical foundations of the story. One influential proposal came from marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman, who argued that dramatic flooding around the Black Sea, caused by the Mediterranean Sea surging through the Bosporus around 5600 BC, may have created the memory of a catastrophic deluge. Their models suggested a rapid rise in water levels that overwhelmed Neolithic settlements along the former shoreline, displacing communities whose descendants preserved the event in oral tradition. The idea found traction because it aligned with widespread flood accounts throughout Mesopotamia, most famously the tale of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Later analyses, however, indicated that the flooding may have been less abrupt than initially proposed, leaving the exact event behind the flood legends uncertain. But if natural rock could be reimagined as a prophet's ark, could other ancient wonders be recast as well? Wyatt turned his interpretive eye to the most iconic structures on Earth, proposing a function for the pyramids of Giza that would upend all of Egyptology: the granaries of Joseph. Ron Wyatt eventually extended his reinterpretations far beyond the biblical lands and directed them toward one of the most iconic monuments in the world, the pyramids of Giza. Through the 1980s and 1990s, he maintained that these structures were not built as the tombs of Egyptian kings, but were instead the great storehouses constructed under the supervision of Joseph during the 7 years of plenty described in Genesis. In his view, the scale and engineering of the pyramids corresponded not to funerary needs, but to a national effort designed to preserve grain against a devastating famine. Wyatt applied this interpretation directly to the internal layout of the Great Pyramid. He argued that the steep ramp of the Grand Gallery served as a system for moving grain into the upper chambers. He treated the so-called King's Chamber as a central storage vault built to protect the main reserves and considered the Queen's Chamber and related passages to be secondary compartments. The narrow shafts rising through the masonry were described as ventilation openings intended to control moisture within the structure. By reassigning the function of each feature, he reframed the monument as a utilitarian complex rather than a royal tomb, proposing that the Egyptians remembered Joseph not through written records, but through the lasting architecture of the famine years. The idea derived much of its initial strength from the pyramid's sheer size and precision. The Great Pyramid contains an immense volume of space, and its internal passages are unlike anything in later Egyptian tombs. To supporters of the theory, these unusual features suggested a non-funerary origin. The contrast between the austerity of the interior and the opulence expected in a royal burial added to the impression that the structure's purpose might have been misunderstood. The combination of an enormous capacity, a complex system of chambers, and the absence of typical tomb decoration led some to consider whether the monument's engineering could have served a practical purpose rather than a ritual one. However, when placed against the broader body of archaeological and textual evidence, the granary interpretation collapses. The Great Pyramid is not isolated. It sits at the center of a carefully organized complex that includes a valley temple, a causeway, and a mortuary temple. These buildings form a unified system used exclusively for funerary rites, and their surviving inscriptions refer to offerings, rituals, and the king's journey into the afterlife. The pyramid conforms to the established pattern of Old Kingdom royal tomb architecture, which appears first at Djoser's step pyramid and develops through the 4th dynasty. Inside the pyramid, the features that Wyatt reassigned to grain storage align with Egyptian royal tradition. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber is carved from a single block too large to have been moved through the passages, indicating it was placed during construction specifically for a burial. The ascending and descending corridors mirror the arrangements found in earlier and later pyramids, where they functioned as ceremonial and structural components, rather than as conduits for large quantities of food. The shafts leading upward from the king's chamber were designed with astronomical alignment in mind, pointing towards circumpolar stars associated with eternity, in line with the Egyptians' beliefs about the king's continued existence after death. The broader historical record further contradicts the granary theory. The pyramids of Giza were built more than a millennium before the era in which Joseph is traditionally placed. No texts from the Old Kingdom mention his name, his office, or a prolonged famine of the type described in Genesis. Egyptian sources from periods closer to Joseph's proposed time frame do mention the construction of storehouses. Still, those facilities were made of mud brick and located near administrative centers and river ports, not carved into or built upon enormous stone monuments. Grain was stored in silos designed for easy access and rapid distribution, not in elevated chambers reachable only through narrow, sharply angled passages. Beyond the historical and archaeological evidence, the pyramids themselves have inspired an array of alternative theories unrelated to biblical narrative. Some researchers suggest they served as astronomical observatories, aligning with key stars to regulate the calendar. Others propose they were symbolic representations of the primordial mound of creation, embodying Egyptian cosmology. Additional fringe theories claim the structures were built with lost technologies or served as repositories of ancient scientific knowledge. While vastly different in method and credibility, these theories show how the pyramids' precision invites speculation. None, however, has overturned the consistent archaeological context that anchors them to royal burial. From the grandeur of the pyramids, Wyatt's search for evidence of divine judgment led him to a scorched, barren landscape, a place where he believed the very rubble of hellfire could still be picked up and held in the hand. The scorched earth of judgment. In the early 1990s, Ron Wyatt directed his search for biblical evidence toward the Dead Sea's barren shores. He moved from monuments carved by ancient hands to a landscape shaped by heat, salt, and geological upheaval. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, long described as cities consumed by fire from heaven, guided his following announcement. He said he had found not only their location but their physical remains, objects he believed were the fused residues of divine judgment. Along the Israeli side of the Dead Sea, he gathered brittle gray balls and sulfur-encrusted stones that crumbled in the hand. He declared these were the ashes, debris, and brimstone of the destroyed cities, the last physical traces of a catastrophic moment recorded in Genesis. Wyatt explained his discovery in stark, literal terms. The pale, fragile balls, light enough to crush between one's fingers, were presented as the mineralized remains of buildings and organic material violently incinerated in an instant. He described the porous, yellowish nodules he collected as actual brimstone, not merely a natural form of sulfur, but the very substance that had rained down upon the cities. According to him, the transformation of these materials could only be the result of supernatural heat. He identified several sites along the Dead Sea's western edge as the locations of the 5 ancient cities of the plain, insisting that the eroded hills and sharp ridges visible there were the outlines of the vanished towns. Anyone who visited, he said, could stoop down, pick up one of the ashen fragments, and hold a physical remnant of the biblical destruction in their palm. For those unfamiliar with the region, the setting itself lends an unsettling gravity to such a claim. The Dead Sea is the lowest place on Earth, a depression so hot and saline that almost nothing survives on its exposed surfaces. Its shoreline is a labyrinth of pale cliffs, mineral crusts, and jagged outcrops that seem shaped by fire. Crystalline deposits cling to the rocks like melted wax. Some surfaces appear warped or pitted, as though briefly exposed to scorching heat and then frozen in place. The air carries a sharp chemical tang, intensified in pockets where sulfur naturally vents from the ground. In such an environment, the objects Wyatt collected can, at first glance, seem like the aftermath of a violent event. The crumbly, chalk-like spheres resemble residue left after combustion. The pungent odor clinging to specific stones can evoke the age-old language of fire and brimstone. The Dead Sea Basin does not need help appearing otherworldly. Its landscape already conveys an atmosphere of desolation that feels ancient, as though marked by a forgotten catastrophe. This visual severity makes it easy to understand how a visitor might pause for a moment when turning one of these brittle pieces in the hand. The environment amplifies the imagination, a lifeless expanse where the ground itself seems burned. where twisted mineral shapes mimic ruins and where the low, dense heat radiating from the earth gives the impression of something scorched long ago. In such a setting, Wyatt's assertion that these scattered pieces were the remnants of a divine event could seem, for a fleeting moment, plausible. The impression, however, does not survive contact with the region's geology. The materials Wyatt collected are consistent with the natural processes that have shaped the Dead Sea for countless millennia. The light, powdery balls he presented as ash are evaporate nodules. Their composition of gypsum, barite, and other mineral salts forms through the constant cycle of inflow and evaporation, a unique feature of this terminal lake. As water from nearby hills and the Jordan River enters the basin, it brings dissolved minerals that crystallize as the water evaporates under the intense sun. The minerals bind into crusts and compact into nodules, creating fragile formations that look deceptively like burned residue. Their texture results from their chemical structure rather than heat. Wyatt's world was built on interpreting landscapes as divine artifacts. But what do genuine, earth-shaking discoveries from the deep actually look like when they aren't filtered through the lens of Scripture? The answers lie not in prophecy, but in painstaking science, beginning with a mysterious signal from the deepest, darkest trenches of the Pacific, a breath of methane in the abyss. In 2025, a team of scientists piloting the deep-sea submersible Fendouje conducted dives into the Hadal zone of the Pacific Ocean, the planet's deepest trenches, including the Kuril-Kamchatka and Aleutian trenches between Russia and Alaska. At depths ranging from 19,000 to 30,000 feet, the researchers encountered a previously undocumented ecosystem extending across approximately 1,550 miles of seafloor. The community was dense and interconnected, composed of large clams and mussels, towering tube worms with red-tinged tips, and phosphorescent snails climbing the structures. Unlike typical deep-sea environments, this ecosystem did not rely on organic debris from the surface, but on chemicals seeping from the earth itself. The life forms here are sustained by chemosynthesis, a process in which microbes convert chemical compounds into usable energy. Microorganisms in the trench sediments metabolize ancient organic matter accumulated over millennia, producing methane. This methane, along with hydrogen sulfide from the crust, supports specialized bacteria that live symbiotically inside clams and tube worms. The bacteria chemically convert the methane and sulfide into organic carbon and energy, which the host organisms use to grow and form dense colonies in the absence of sunlight. This mechanism allows a fully functioning food web to exist in total darkness, while simultaneously locking carbon into the local environment and preventing its release into the ocean and atmosphere. The discovery raises several scientific questions. Researchers are investigating whether similar ecosystems exist in other Hadal zones worldwide, as life was observed in 19 of 23 dives in the Pacific. The adaptations of the clams, tube worms, and microbes to extreme pressures, near-freezing temperatures, and complete darkness remain under study, with potential implications for understanding the limits of life on Earth and other planetary bodies. The ecosystem is also affected by human activity. Trench sediments accumulate microplastics, toxic chemicals, and antibiotic resistance genes from surface runoff. Proposed deep-sea mining operations could release sediment plumes capable of smothering these communities before their biology is fully understood. A terrestrial parallel exists in the flooded caves of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where shrimp and bacteria rely on dissolved gases instead of sunlight. These cave systems are threatened by infrastructure projects, such as the Maya Train, which involve drilling pillars through the aquifers, risking the destruction of these chemical-based ecosystems. The Hadal trenches reveal a self-sustaining, chemically powered biosphere that survives without sunlight and under conditions previously considered inhospitable. The discovery demonstrates that extreme environments can support complex life, that deep-sea ecosystems contribute to planetary carbon regulation, and that many aspects of Earth's biosphere remain unexplored and highly vulnerable. While some search the deep for echoes of ancient cataclysms, other researchers quietly uncover sunken time capsules that speak to the slow, patient rhythm of human history, revealing not drowned armies, but forgotten commutes. The ancient parking lot. On the shores of Lake Mendota near Madison, Wisconsin, a discovery spanning millennia began with a single dugout canoe. In 2021, maritime archaeologists from the Wisconsin Historical Society recovered the first vessel, radiocarbon dated to approximately 1,200 years ago. The following year, another canoe was found, this one 3,000 years old. Systematic sonar surveys and careful excavations revealed 16 ancient dugout canoes clustered along a former prehistoric shoreline. The oldest canoe was crafted around 5,200 years ago, predating the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and the youngest dated to about 700 years ago. The sequence established that this shoreline had been used repeatedly for more than 4 millennia. Archaeologists, working in partnership with the Ho-Chunk Nation and the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, proposed that the site functioned as a communal canoe cache, a central resource where vessels were left for shared use. The site's geography supports this interpretation. Thousands of years ago, a prolonged drought lowered Lake Mendota's water level, exposing shallow bays and gullies that provided natural entry and exit points from the higher surrounding terrain. The canoes were positioned along these access points, indicating intentional placement rather than random loss. Analysis of the wood confirmed sophisticated planning and knowledge of materials. Laboratory examination identified red oak, white oak, ash, elm, cottonwood, and basswood. Red oak, while naturally porous, develops internal structures called tyloses when stressed, blocking water flow and increasing buoyancy and rot resistance. The selective use of such trees suggests deliberate preparation and an understanding of long-term material performance. It is also obvious that preservation was achieved through deliberate caching in lakebed sediment. The anaerobic conditions of shallow mud protected the wood from microbial decay and freeze-thaw cycles at the water's surface, creating a natural time capsule that allowed the canoes to survive for thousands of years. For now, several aspects of the site remain under investigation. The site is part of a broader network of over 110 ancient dugout canoes documented across Wisconsin, confirming the existence of extensive waterborne transportation routes connecting pre-colonial communities over hundreds of miles, and ground-penetrating radar and further sonar surveys aim to locate an associated settlement. Unlike unverifiable claims of miraculous artifacts, the canoes offer data-based insights into technological skill, environmental knowledge, and regional connectivity, establishing a tangible chapter of North American prehistory and confirming the scale and sophistication of early waterborne networks. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.